Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to use this Butterfly Bouquet Betterpress plate, and I'm going to use an ink blended masking technique. That's an easy way to do one layer cards. Now this isn't going to be a true one layer card because I'm not working on the card base. It's more like a one layer card front where I'm doing an image that looks like it's got more layers than it actually does. And once that image is done, I'll trim it down, mat it, and then put it on my card base. I am putting my plate on my base of my Betterpress, and I am inking it with the Betterpress ink. You could use whatever ink you are wanting to use with this. I like the black, it's permanent, and I don't have to wait for it to dry when I go to do my ink blending. So in order to ink that plate, I'm going to tap that ink pad on there and twist it just a little bit. I have Betterpress cardstock on the clear plate and it's taped in place. Put the clear plate onto the base and then put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. And as it's going through my die cutting machine, it is pushing and pressing that ink into place. And I love the Betterpress images because they create such beautiful detailed images. Now, typically before I put my plates away, I like to clean them off, and I just use Ranger Archival ink cleaner to do that. Put a little bit on there and then just scrub it easily with a microfiber cloth just to make sure that I don't have any ink residue on there for the next time that I want to use it. Now I'm choosing an oval die here to do my mask, and I'm going to use some Gina K masking magic sheets to do this. I just place that die that I've chosen on the masking sheet and put it through my die cutting machine to cut that shape. Now I'm only going to be using the outside of this shape for this particular card, so I'm going to save that one for the inside part for a future project. Now I am only doing one oval here, one layer, but you could do multiple ovals if you wanted to create a little bit more of a layered look. I put it on my image exactly where I want it to go, and you might have noticed that I only took half the backing off, and once I had it placed, I took the other side of the backing off. That way I just have half the adhesive exposed, and then once I have it in place, I can take the other half off and get the rest down. To start with, I'm using some Speckled Egg Distress ink to put the background on there. And I just lift one of the sides of my mask off just to make sure that I have it dark enough. I want to make sure that I have some good contrast between that oval and then the natural color of this cardstock. For the rest of the ink blending, I'm just using some detailed ink blending brushes, and I'm using distress inks for all of this, but you don't necessarily have to. Any ink that you like to do your ink blending with will work. I did make sure to choose a lighter color for my background so that my colors that I'm doing, my flowers, my butterflies, will easily show off on top of it. And that blue isn't going to affect the color a whole lot. You'll see a tiny little bit of that blue hint, but it's not going to affect it so much that that's all you see. So that light pink there was Spun Sugar, and here I'm using some picked raspberry. I'm using some detailed blending brushes to create that detail, and for the darker color I'm going from the center of the petals or the center of the flowers towards the outside of the petals. I want to have that shading in the center of that flower, so that's where I'm putting the darkest of the colors of ink. For all of these I'm only using 2 shades of ink. You could use 3 if you wanted to, especially for these flowers because they are just a little bit bigger than the other flowers that I'll be ink blending, but I found that 2 was enough. I didn't really think I needed much more than that, but if you want a little bit more deep shading, you could choose more. Now I'm using detailed blending brushes, and these come in a few different sizes, so I did choose some of the smaller sizes for when I was doing my darker colors. For the light pink here, I had a little bit larger of a blending brush. It was still a detailed one. It just covered the area a little bit quicker. But for the shading, I'm using the smallest of the ones that I have, just because I want to be able to get into some smaller areas. So when it comes to the purple, I am going to be using the same brush for the light color as the dark color, and I'm just using one of the small ones. These are really tiny, tiny flowers. I'm not actually even sure what type of flowers these ones are supposed to be. I just thought purple was going to be a pretty color. I'm going in here with some shaded lilac first, and then for my darker color, I'm going to be using Wilted Violet. I'm using a little bit of this color in the centers of the butterfly wings as well, and then I'm going to use my picked raspberry for the outside of the butterfly wings, just to put that pink in a different area as well. and it's going to tie that butterfly in with the floral image. You could use whatever color you wanted. So if you wanted to do a contrasting color for that butterfly, you absolutely could have. I chose distress inks for this because it will ink blend beautifully. Another thing that you could do if you wanted is you could use distress oxides. They are a dye and a pigment blend, but they have a little bit more opacity to them. So if you wanted your color to be a little bit more opaque and it has a little bit of a chalky look to it, you could do that. In that case, what I would have done was leave that Betterpress plate on my base. So once this piece was ink blended, and I would ink blend it while this was still taped to the clear plate so that everything was positioned properly, what you could do is once it was ink blended, you could re-ink your plate and then put it through again and get that ink right on top. Because oxide inks would cover the detail of the image, but it would give a very similar but a little bit different look. So it's a different way to get a very similar look and get those details back once that oxide ink covers it. But you do want to make sure if you wanted to try it that way, to leave your press plate on the base and leave this piece here that we're ink blending on the clean plate, and do all your ink blending while that's still taped in place. And it's easy enough to do. It wouldn't get in the way at all, but you do want to make sure that they are left on there so that they're positioned perfectly to put it through again. Once I am done my flowers, I'm using some bundled sage for my leaves. And then for the shading on my leaves, I'm going to use some peeled paint. Now I'm only doing the leaves that don't go past my outline of the mask here because I don't want that line on that leaf. Once I'm done all the leaves that don't go past that mask, I can take that mask off and I can fill in the rest of them just to make sure that I have some good clean ink coverage. And like I said, I don't have that line or that ridge in the center of that leaf. Now that mask that I had, I just put it to the side. It doesn't need to get thrown away. Those can be used over and over several times. So I will show you what I do with it once I'm done. Now there are also a few flowers that went past my mask, so I'm coloring them as well. And for the smaller areas, I'm tilting my brush a little bit and only using the side bristles. So I'm even using that brush to color in the stem of these flowers because I'm just having that brush tilted, only going and using the side of that brush, and it gets enough color down there that you can see that it's colored green, but it doesn't have to be colored absolutely perfectly. And as this ink dries, if I find that it needs a little bit more shading, I can go right back in and add a little bit more of that dark green or even the dark pink or whatever color I want, just to deepen that shading a little bit. You can go over and just apply extra layers of that ink, and that will just make it a little bit darker and give it a little bit more dimension. I absolutely love the fact that this image goes past the lines of that oval, and I think it gives it a lot more interest to it. And I specifically chose an oval that was sized so that it would do this. So for that mask that I put to the side, I'm just putting that backing right back on there, and then I put the backing as well, or sorry, that mask as well as the center part in my package of Masking Magic. I have several different ones in here that I just keep, and if I want to use them over and over again, I've got them right there ready to use. I chose some Hickory Smoke to put in the center of the open flower just to give it a little bit more darkness in that center. And then I'm using my trimmer and I'm cutting my piece down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to put a mat around this, and you don't necessarily have to do this cutting all at once. You can see that I go around several times, and that's mainly because that top and that bottom part of the image is about 5 inches, so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't cutting any of that bit off. Once I have it cut down to that size, I'm going to glue my mat to my card base and then glue this image to the mat, and you can see how it frames it really quite nicely. I'm gluing everything together with Barely Art glue in a fine tip bottle, and I like to put a large acrylic block over my piece while it's drying just to keep everything flat and make sure it has good contact with it. Now, because the cotton cardstock and the Distress ink look fairly flat, I'm taking a Stardust gel pen and just adding a little bit of sparkle to it. Now, this pen doesn't have any color to it, but it has a little bit of a shimmer to it. So I'm just going outside the edges of my petals as well as the buds of the flowers, and I'm also going to do that on the leaves and a little bit on the butterfly. And like I said, it's just going to add a bit of sparkle. It's just going to give it a bit of a texture, and it's going to be something that will be able to catch the light. Typically when I'm using this pen, I don't use this much, or I don't do this much with it, but the image itself just kind of had one texture to it, and I wanted to give it something else just to give it a little bit more interest. And this is the easiest way possible. And this gel pen, you don't have to wait for it to dry or anything. And I'm not coloring in full areas. I'm just kind of outlining just inside the black line of it. You'll see me lifting it up and twisting it just a little bit. It's mainly because I can't see where I'm putting the pen, so I have to lift it up and tilt it in the light to see the shimmer in order to see where I still haven't put that pen. And even on camera with how much I'm lifting it up and tilting it, you actually can't see the shimmer. You'll see it at the end when I show you the card. You can see on camera the shimmer on the outside of the leaves. For the flower that is open a little bit, I just put a few dots of Stickles just for some more sparkle. Now I'm leaving my card without a sentiment, but you could easily put a sentiment on here if you wanted to add that. That sentiment is from the wonderful script sentiments set from Spellbinders, and I think it would be a perfect sentiment for it, but I wanted to leave this with as few layers on the image part as possible. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.